Go ahead and return back to Revelation 3. Revelation 3. And let's go ahead and look here at verse number 7. To the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, These things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. And behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God. And I will write upon him my new name. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Father, would you help us as we look at some history again this evening, to see how the principles that we hold to as Baptists, as believers, Bible believers, how they impact the way we behave. And Lord, I pray that you would bless our time, strengthen and encourage us through this. Lord, help us to learn from the past and help us to get a better grasp of the mission that we have. Please bless in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're going to try to get to America from England tonight. Here in Revelation chapter 3, we're looking at this period of Philadelphia. And right in verse number 8, we see a couple things here. One, Jesus has set before the church during this period an open door. And as we discussed at the beginning of this with Philadelphia, this idea of the open door has to do, as it's used in the New Testament, has to do with the idea of opportunity to preach the gospel. So this is going to be a period of great gospel expansion. Now, some of that's going to come about as a result of the Reformation. Because with the Reformation, Martin Luther, now people are going to begin to get the Bible into their hands. People are going to personally, I guess you could say, rediscover the gospel. Not that the gospel was ever lost, but people are going to discover it for themselves from the Word of God, and they're going to begin to take it everywhere, because everywhere the Bible goes, the gospel is going to go. And so, even though there's going to be false doctrine and things like that, you're still going to have these people who are taking the gospel places. People are going to get saved. God is opening up a door for them, and no one's going to be able to shut it during this period of time. It's going to be unhindered. But then also he makes mention of the fact, thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. So here again we see the word being prominent during this period of time. This is what the Reformation period is all about, is about the Bible and getting the Bible into the hands of the people. Now that's going to come with a lot of opposition, because one thing the enemy does not want us to do, one, he does not want us to have the Bible. If we have the Bible, he doesn't want us to read the Bible. And if we read the Bible, he certainly doesn't want us to believe the Bible. And so all three of those things are going to be attacked during this period of time. And he says, you have a little strength. And that's exactly right. We have a little strength. So how do we overcome? Well, we overcome by the one who has the key of David, the one who actually opens and doesn't shut. And so it's through Christ. That's what he's encouraging them with. Now, with this gospel expansion, it's still going to be persecution largely that's going to drive this mission. And that's the way the church has always spread, how the gospel has always spread. The most has been during the times of persecution. Now, let's just get into this here. I'm going to make some side comments, but I want to try to get through this. Really, the next lesson is where we're going to get into a lot more detail with some things, but I want to give this kind of as a preview. So when we think of America, we often think of the freedom we enjoy to worship God as we choose. That's a wonderful benefit that we have here in America, at least for the time being. This has not always been the case, and this is one of the things that we don't often think about. In history class, just conveniently removes this, because you think of the Pilgrims coming over and they make it look like, oh, it's just religious liberty and everything's fine. Baptists especially were greatly persecuted in this country until the early 1800s. It was not a popular thing to be a Baptist in this country. And so we're going to get into some of that. So it's not always been the case that people have had the complete freedom to worship here. The struggle they endured was a continuation of the long-time struggle transplanted here from England and Europe. Now, most of the early Baptists in this country came from England. Now, you remember we talked last time about the General Baptist and the Particular Baptist. The General Baptist being led by a pastor named John Smythe, who took an independent separatist congregation from England, and he took them to Leiden, Holland, where the Anabaptists were, and they were seeking rebaptism. Well, they never got that, but they stayed there anyway for a long period of time. And then when Smythe and a group came back to England to establish a church, a large number of those people stayed there. And those people that stayed there eventually came over on the Mayflower in 1620 and founded Plymouth, Massachusetts. They were coming over to the Virginia colony, and, coming across the Atlantic, they ran into a storm. They got going a little late, and so they ended up farther north than they were anticipating. They wanted to go to Virginia. Instead, they ended up in Cape Cod. And so there they founded, and they were a month late getting in, and so instead of getting in at the fall, they got in right at the beginning of winter, which was not very good, and so half the people died. But those were large number of those people were people that were associated with the Anabaptists and that group from John Smythe, who founded the first Baptist church in England. And so they eventually briefly went back to England just to get on the Mayflower, and then they came across. So most of the early Baptists in this country came from England. The English authorities were dictators, enforcers, persecutors. Though there were differences with each new head of state, one thing remained the same. You can't disagree without constant oppression and persecution. Sorry, still getting over this stuff. Now, let's just kind of look at the condition of England. Why would anybody want to leave England and come to the New World? Well, I don't know. England is just such a wonderful place. Nobody smiles over there, I don't think. But let's just kind of get an idea of what's going on historically that causes the Baptists especially to want to get out of there. So you have Mary the First. We affectionately know her as what? Bloody Mary. So that's your blank there on the second line. But she's the daughter of Henry VIII. And she enforced Catholicism on the people. Now, remember, Henry VIII, he pulls away from the Pope of Rome. Part of the reason is because his wife could not produce an heir. They've been trying for 15 years. She was the daughter of the King of Spain. Now, Spain has the Pope basically in their pocket. Now, these allegiances, these marriages, were to form family alliances between nations so they would be protected from one another, so they wouldn't fight with each other. Well, Henry's wife is not producing an heir, so he wants a divorce. Well, if the Pope will annul the marriage, then technically it's not as frowned upon as if he just outright divorced her. And so it would keep kind of the friendly situation between the countries. Well, that wasn't going to happen with Spain. And so Since Spain has the Pope in their back pocket, the Pope refuses to grant the annulment, and so Henry just says, fine, forget it, and he withdraws from the Catholic Church, and he becomes the head, essentially the Pope for the Church of England. Now, something he's going to do that is good is because he has now this, he's a spiteful man, and because he has kind of this bitterness against the Pope, while he is really Catholic at heart and in his beliefs, he's going to grant slight toleration to more and more Protestant things. In fact, the bishop that he is going to appoint as the Archbishop of Canterbury, as the Archbishop of the Church of England, is actually a Protestant. And his name being Thomas Cranmer. Thomas Cranmer was really a good, godly man, not right in everything, but the doctrinal statement that he writes up for the Church of England, we probably could sign our names to for the most part. It was very evangelical in the sense of the gospel and such. But Thomas Cranmer, he is totally devoted to the Protestant Reformation and trying to get the gospel into people and get people to understand the Bible. So what Cranmer does is he's going to create a book to help people pray called the Book of Common Prayer for the Church of England. It's going to get revised later on. But he also begins to develop a series of sermons that are going to be put into book form and given to all the churches. That way, everybody's being taught a certain amount of theology and actually being taught the Bible. And so moving away from this Catholic tradition to very Bible-based things, and the Church of England now, instead of the church services being in Latin, they're all going to be in English. So Cranmer is trying to move this thing away from Catholicism into the Reformation. Henry's kind of in between here. He doesn't like the Pope, but he doesn't necessarily like the Reformation. But whatever I can do to make the Pope upset, then I'll do that. And so that's what he's working on doing. And then Henry VIII, in 1534, he's going to burn William Tyndale for having the Bible in the English language. 1534, he withdraws from the Pope. 1536, he burns William Tyndale because of having the Bible in the English language. Now, when Tyndale is tied to the stake and being burned, the last words out of his mouth is, "God, open the King of England's eyes." Now, a year later, what's going to happen is under Cranmer, he's going to convince Henry VIII, we need to go all in on the Reformation. And the way that we do that is we put the Bible into the language of the people. And so that's going to cause him then to authorize the translation of the Great Bible, which is called Great because it was so big, it was for pulpit use, it was so big, you couldn't carry it. It's not one that you carried back and forth. It weighed like 60, 80 pounds is what it weighed. It's a large volume. So that's Henry VIII. Henry VIII dies. His son Edward comes to the throne. He's 9 years old. He only rules for a few years, but he's surrounded by Protestant influence. All of his teachers, all of his mentors, everybody's a Protestant. And so he's swinging England even more into Protestantism. But then he dies, and then Mary I comes to the throne. Now, Mary I, her dad was king in Spain, and they have the Pope in their back pocket, so they're very Catholic. So Mary is going to try to pull England back away from the Protestant Reformation, and she's going to try to take everything back into Catholicism. So you remember, whoever the monarch is with the Church of England, that's what the church is. So if the monarch is Catholic, then the church becomes Catholic because they can appoint whoever they want for bishop. And then the bishop carries out the will of the king. And if the monarch is Protestant, then the church goes back to Protestant. And that's what's going on here with Bloody Mary. Now, she hated the Baptists so much that not only did she burn them, but she could not stand the thought of their decomposing bodies being in the ground. And Mary would have them dug up, the bodies reburned till they were ash, and then would have them spread in the rivers. So she just didn't like us a whole lot. Now, she is going to have Thomas Cranmer executed. He's going to be burned. Now, prior to his burning, she is going to kind of make a deal with him. She's a politician. If you will recant your faith, this Protestant faith, then I'll not execute you. So initially, he signs the paper, recanting. But he still has to go through trial and publicly declare that. Well, the night before, as he's praying, he realizes, I can't go through with this. I can't do this. And so he comes to the trial and stands up and recants his recantation. And obviously Mary's pretty upset with that. Well, as soon as court's dismissed, he's taken outside where the fire is already going. And because I think he was right-handed, because he used his right hand to sign that, he offered his right hand first into the fire because he says, it was this hand that offended my Lord. And then he was subsequently burned to death. But Mary would also later have John Rogers burned, who translated the Matthew's Bible. Okay? So this is what's going on here in Tom and become the queen. Now, Elizabeth I is a Protestant, not cousin, Protestant half-sister. I'm thinking of Mary, Queen of Scots. The Protestant half-sister of Bloody Mary, and she despised Mary in favor of the Episcopal Church of England. She persecuted all Catholics and non-Catholics who dissented. Over 200 Catholics were put to death under her reign. Non-Catholics were imprisoned for their first offense, banished for their second, and put to death if they returned. Now, what's going to take place is these people that had left England during the time of Mary, they go down to Geneva, Switzerland, where John Calvin is, and that's where the Geneva Bible is going to be produced. And people really like the Geneva Bible. When Elizabeth comes to the throne, Geneva Bible comes to England and becomes very popular. Now, the Geneva Bible is the very first study Bible. It's the first time the entire Bible is chapter and verse divided. So the first time you see John 3:16 is going to be in a Geneva Bible because there was no verse divisions before that. And the reason they did that is because they had an extensive series of study notes in the margins and all around the text to help people understand the Bible. So people loved this. The problem is none of the kings or queens liked it because the Geneva Bible taught against the doctrine of the divine right of kings. That yes, God appoints the leaders, but they're not always right. And in fact, most of them are corrupt and they need to be rejected, and if they tell you to do something contrary to the Bible, you don't have to do it. And they didn't like that. So Elizabeth comes to the throne. While she is Protestant, she doesn't like the Geneva Bible for that reason. And so she wants a new Bible that's published, that's produced, without the notes. And so, thus, you have the Bishop's Bible that's going to be produced. And once the Bishop's Bible is produced, that becomes the Bible for the churches. That's why it's the Bishop's Bible. And her goal is to eliminate the Geneva Bible. But people love it so much, they keep using it in their homes. So all these ideas are continuing to go on. So people are continuing to dissent from the Church of England and from the Queen. Now, so she dies, 1603, and her cousin now, James I, that's your blank there, James. And what is James going to do? Yeah, your 1611 Bible comes from him. Now, James was not necessarily a great guy. He was extremely intelligent. He read the scriptures in the original languages. He could read them and translate them into several languages. He had translated numerous passages. Now, he was a genius when it came to the Bible and translation. He knew it well. And that's one of the reasons he was for another translation of the Bible, because he was familiar with the bishop's Bible and the versions that had gone before, and he saw various things in there that is like, we could clean this up and make it a little bit better. But he wasn't going to push that. But now, let's notice here, James had ruled Scotland. He was James the sixth of Scotland and James the first of England. But Scotland was mostly Presbyterian, and the Puritans of England held many of the same views as the Presbyterians. So they're thinking, well, great, James is going to be king, and so now we'll get to have our way in purifying the Church of England. Well, that's not what happened. So what they wanted to do, what the Puritans wanted, so the Church of England set up, you have the king appoints the archbishop, and then you have the archbishop, and then you have various, very similar to the Catholic Church, you have like a diocesan bishop, who are over regions and various numbers of churches. And then, as England begins to spread out and go to India and to South Africa and to Australia, and the Church of England goes there, you're going to have bishops that are going to be over those territories as well. And then you're going to have the elders of the church. Well, the Puritans, because of their Presbyterian beliefs, they wanted to get rid of that hierarchy. Let's just have it dealt with on a local level. And so they wanted the king to do that. Well, the king actually had a phrase. He established a philosophy of no bishop, no king. And essentially what he's wanting to do here is this meant that unless the hierarchy ruled the church, it would be difficult for a hierarchy to rule the state. So King James is wanting to keep the church and state together. Elizabeth, prior to this, had separated them. She said, I am the head of the state. The bishop is the head of the church. And obviously, she was wrong in some of that. But in dividing those two areas of responsibility, that was a good thing. Well, King James is putting them back together. So now what he's going to do, he's going to return to, I have my agenda of what I want to do, and so I'm going to appoint my cabinet. I'm going to ordain the archbishop, and then the archbishop is going to see to it that my agenda is carried out through the church, and that's how we're going to influence people to run the kingdom as I want it run. That's what's going on here. Now, while in previous regimes, I guess you could say, people could leave England if they didn't agree. People under the blood of Mary, they were free to leave. Go ahead, get out. Just don't let us catch you on the way. Not the case with King James. If you disagreed, he didn't want you to leave. You're either going to conform or we're going to persecute you. That's what's going to happen. And so, 1611, James had a man burned for denying the Trinity. Obviously, it's wrong to deny the Trinity. But do we burn and kill people because they disagree with us? No. The following year, he burned a Baptist minister, Edward Whitman. So that's the guy that authorized our Bible. He had a Baptist preacher burned. Now, his son Charles comes to the throne, 1625, and he made William Laud the Archbishop of Canterbury, the religious head of the Church of England, and he enforced strict Anglicanism and attempted to monitor all Puritan and Baptist views and writings that were against Anglicanism. So he's establishing a police agency. He wants everything read. He wants to know everything that's being published. Anything that would dissent, we need to stamp it out. We need to find it and stamp it out. And so during this time, many are burned at the stake. In 1646, Samuel Otis, a Baptist preacher, was imprisoned for murder. The charge was that a woman had died just a few weeks after baptism. At the trial, it was found out she had been in better health after her baptism. It was kind of a sudden thing that she died. It had nothing to do with her baptism. Then Charles II comes to the throne. He's son of Charles I. He was Episcopalian by profession, but a papist at heart because he was converted back to Catholicism on his deathbed. And he passed the Act of Uniformity. Now, the Act of Uniformity required that every church in the empire have the exact same liturgy. Everybody's going to use the Book of Common Prayer. Everybody's going to read the same passages. Everybody's going to follow the liturgical calendar. Every church you go to, it's going to be the exact same all year round, everywhere you go. There's not going to be any difference. And so anybody that doesn't want to conform to that, they're going to be persecuted. And so some ministers compromised for the sake of their goods and families. Others chose to stand for the truth and were beaten, had their goods confiscated, and were imprisoned. In 1661, Charles had Elder John James, a Baptist pastor, hung and quartered. The quarters were placed on the city gate, and his head was put on a pole outside the meeting house where he preached. Untold numbers perished during this time standing for Christ. Wait, we think we got it rough, don't we? Man, it's so hard in America to be faithful to the Lord. Man, we have no idea. So this was a situation from which our Baptist forefathers were seeking refuge. This is why Baptists are wanting to come to America. Now, they think coming to the New World, well, everything's going to be better because we're going to have England and the king behind us because the colonies were essentially being established as an independent, to some degree, an independent nation, kind of like Australia is, but a colony of. So there's weird relationship that goes on there. So it's independent, but it's not really. And that's what's actually going to eventually end up leading to the revolution. So hopes were high in the New World. There would be no Catholic or Anglican strongholds, as the ships coming to America carried Baptists, Pilgrims, Quakers, and other dissenting groups. And they were hopeful that there would be no persecution as these other groups were fleeing for the same reason. And you would think, and that would be a logical conclusion. Okay, here I am as a Baptist. I'm leaving England because they're going to take my property and try to kill me and my family, so I'm leaving. And on ship with me is a Puritan man who is trying to purify the Church of England, but he is facing the exact same persecution I am, and so he's leaving for the exact same reason I am. And you would think, coming to America then, we could be friends. That maybe we could sit together and have a Bible study or, drink a cup of tea or something like that. No. Because once the Puritans get over here, and once the Quakers get over here, and once all these other dissenting groups get over here, they are going to begin to establish local communities governed not by the people, but by who? The church. And are the Baptists going to just say, oh, well, okay, well, we'll be a citizen? No, because that would require us denying our baptism, accepting your baptism and your doctrine. And so that's considered an act of treason. And so Baptists are going to find in America the exact same persecution they left England for. So the Puritans who had faced, the same persecution as the Baptists under William Laud quickly forgot their history and set up a church-state government of their own as soon as they had the opportunity. They were faced with the same question the Reformers were faced with. Here's your next blank. Where does the church begin and end? And then this religious intolerance would last till the 19th century, till the 1800s. Now, this isn't a problem for Baptists to understand. Where does the church end and the state begin? We don't have to worry about that. It's pretty clear. We don't have... The state has its commission from the Lord, Romans 13, to reward the good, punish the evil. They establish laws that facilitate those purposes. At least that's what they're supposed to be doing. I think they get it backwards most of the time, but that's what they're supposed to be doing. And the church has a mission, Matthew 28, to go and make disciples, baptize the disciples, and teach them to be disciples. That's what the church is supposed to be doing. It's not the state's responsibility to evangelize. It's not the church's responsibility to reward the good and punish the evil. As much as we would like to be able to do that sometimes, that's not what our mission is. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. So we don't have a problem with that. The problem comes in when you reject sound doctrine for replacement theology. This is why it's so important that we understand the difference between Israel and the church. That we're not the same. That we're not under the old covenant anymore. That we're not establishing a priesthood. Under the Old Testament, the church and the state were together, essentially. The church was the state. That's what Israel was in the Old Testament. It was governed by the priest through God. And they rewarded the good, and they punished the evil. And God worked that way, but that's not what he's doing now under the New Testament. And so when you get rid of that distinction and you try to say that the church is Israel, and therefore we go back to the Old Testament to apply Israel's principles to the church spiritually, then you come up with all sorts of strange things. Now, let's look at this real quick here with Dr. John Clark. Now, Dr. John Clark is going to establish the first Baptist church in America. The first, I guess you could say, official Baptist church in America. So he's born October 3rd, 1608, in a farming community of Westhorpe, England, and he was one of 8 kids. 5 of his siblings came to the New World with him, and 4 settled in Newport. That's Rhode Island. Clark was educated in a local village school and later attended the University of Leiden in Holland. So that's the same place where Smythe and the Anabaptists had gone to. So we can see the overlap here of these influences going on. By the time Clark came to America, he had learned and mastered several fields of learning. He was a master of theology. He caused the learned of his day to stutter and second-guess themselves when he gave a defense on the Baptist faith. He was skilled in medicine. He had a firm grasp of the principles of the law. His knowledge of the law was focused on his being a statesman and framer in civil government. Clark was one of the first to transplant Baptist principles and practices. He came to the New World in 1637. In Boston, he and his wife Elizabeth began to minister to the needs of the people. And his skills as a doctor were of utmost importance as they were few and doctors were few, sickness was common. So and if you're a doctor, you're a pretty good guy to have around. Probably want to stay on your good side. Probably don't want to run you off. So now, eventually, they're going to banish John Clark. But there's a battle that goes on. They're kind of tolerant of him for quite a while because he's a doctor and we need to have him around. But that also gives him a great opportunity for what? To preach to people. Because, it wasn't like it is today where you have to make an appointment and go to the doctor's office. The doctor just makes his rounds at this period of time. So, he's just going around. He gets into everybody's home. It doesn't matter whether they're Baptist, Puritan, Anglican, whatever. He's able to get into their home because everybody needs the doctor, especially at this period of time. So he has a tremendous opportunity to not only preach the gospel, but to try to challenge people with the Word of God. And that's exactly what he does. Clark quickly became aware of the sad state of churches. Roger Williams had already been banished before his arrival, and the magistrates had made it illegal to be affiliated with unapproved churches. So, 1635, Roger Williams is banished, and he goes to Aquidneck Island, which later becomes the island of Rhodes, which today we know it as Rhode Island. So he's going to establish a Baptist church there later on, but there at Rhode Island is also where John Clark is going to come as well. So Clark was disarmed due to his suspicion of Anabaptism, and soon after, 76 men were also disarmed. Clark quickly moved to action. Because of his medical skills, he quickly won the favor of those who were banished and became their leader. To maintain peace, Clark was pressed with the need to relocate and organize a scriptural church. The church had its beginning in the winter of 1637. It consisted of Clark's family and 18 other families. Now, when it talks about being disarmed, this was a big deal. This, today, as bad as it would be for the government to come in and take your firearms away, and that would be bad. Not because they're taking your firearms away so much as it is they're impinging upon your rights as an American citizen. They're denying you of your right to keep and bear arms. At this period of time, if you don't have a gun, what don't you have? Safety and food. Because what they do, when they disarm somebody, they're taking away their ability to defend themselves, and they're taking away their ability to hunt for food. And the other thing that they're doing with that is they're going to confiscate all the property. So you don't have anything. You're just left to go out and, whatever the Lord decides, that's what's going to happen to you. Maybe you'll come across some nice Indians, or maybe you'll come across some that will just put you out of your misery really fast. But that also might not happen either way. So these people traveled to New Hampshire in search of religious liberty. They found no rest there and were forced to move due to the cold of winter. In 1638, they made their way southward and into Narragansett Bay. It was there that Roger Williams, who had been fighting for religious liberty, convinced them to move to the island of Aquidneck. They finally landed on the island that would later become the island of Rhodes in 1638. This land was purchased from the Indians, and they settled in the northern section of the island and called it Portsmouth. It was here that the Portsmouth Compact was authored and signed by Clark and signed by 23 additional men of the group. The group landed in the north and immediately began to form a government with full liberty of conscience. In 1638, a portion of the group with Clark moved to the south of the island, which they named Newport. This became a permanent home for the church. So this is the first time, well, I guess I shouldn't say first time. This is really the second time something like this is going on. So when the Pilgrims come over, 1620, and they're up in Massachusetts at Plymouth, they found a government similar to this. It's based on religious liberty. But they also make an error, is they also establish, as Bradford writes in his journal, they established a communistic society. So everybody's just going to share everything. It didn't work out very well. Half the people died that winter. And then they realized, these people, some of them just take advantage of the fact that other people are going to do the work. And so then the following year, they decide, we need to make a law that everybody can have their own lot of land and people can plant their own crops, and that's what you get to eat. And that worked out a lot better. Now, so this is really kind of the second, but this becomes a model for what America is going to become later. Because here in Rhode Island, once they get the Rhode Island Charter, Rhode Island is going to be the first place in America where a Jewish synagogue is going to be established as well. It's going to be just down the road from the Baptist church. Because they want people to be able to come. You're going to worship God according to the dictates of your conscience, and we're not going to force it on you, but we can disagree, and we can still get along with each other in a peaceful society. Not that that happens too much anymore these days, but that's the way they viewed it. So from the beginning of the movement, that resulted in the founding of Portsmouth and Newport, until the charter of 1663 was obtained, Clark was active in public affairs. He held few public offices, but served on many committees. And in a wise and constructive way, was the advisor and spirit in the organization and administration of town and colony government. So here's the Portsmouth Compact. We, whose names were underwritten, do hereby and solemnly in the presence of Jehovah. Hey, could you imagine that? On the state level saying things like this? It's just the way it used to be. We whose names are underwritten do hereby and solemnly in the presence of Jehovah incorporate ourselves into a body politic, and as he shall help, will submit our persons, lives, and estates unto our Lord Jesus Christ, the King of kings and Lord of lords, and to all those perfect and absolute laws of his given in his holy word of truth, to be guided and judged thereby. So that became kind of a founding document for America. This is actually going to become a model in principle for what is going to eventually become our Constitution. So 1652, Clark wrote a book, Ill News from New England. In it he proclaimed the mistreatment of Baptists. His burden is seen in the statement from the book, while old England is becoming new, New England is becoming old. So what's going on at this time is England is becoming progressively more tolerant in regard to religious concernments. But what's happening in America, they're doing the exact opposite. The Puritans are. The Puritans and the Presbyterians and the Anglicans and stuff that are over here, they're becoming more intolerant of religious dissenting ideas. And so while persecution is beginning to ease up a little bit in England, it's becoming more extreme here in America. And so he says, Old England's becoming new, but New England is becoming old. We're we're becoming just like it was back then. That's what we left for, and now that's what we're becoming. By 1663, Clark had spent 13 years as an ambassador from Rhode Island to New England. So Clark, while he's the pastor, he kind of takes a 13-year sabbatical. He's commissioned by Roger Williams and the people there to go back to England to basically beg the king and try to convince the king, give them a charter. The reason they had to have this is because while they had come down and purchased the land from the Indians, without an official charter, as the other colonies expand, the other colonies could come in and absorb them. But if they have an official charter, then the charter from the king states, this is an independent tract of land. This is its own colony recognized by the king. And so that's what 13 years he spends trying to get the king to approve this. And it finally happens. His purpose was to persuade the crown that there was a great need for liberty of conscience. In 1663, Charles II granted the Rhode Island Charter, or the Colonial Charter of 1663. It is still housed in the Rhode Island House in Providence in a fireproof safe, stating that it grants full liberty in religious concernments to the people of Rhode Island. Carved in the marble above the south entrance of the Providence State House is the following: to hold forth a lively experiment that a most flourishing civil state may stand and best be maintained with full liberty in religious concernments. Thomas Jefferson is said to have given Dr. John Clark the credit for obtaining the charter, and he named it as one of the sources from which he derived the principles of the Declaration of Independence. So you see how this influence is coming about. Now, where is this influence beginning? It's beginning with the Baptists. It's not coming from the Protestants. The influence is coming from the Baptists. The Baptists are stirring up the Protestants with regard to these ideas, but this is coming from the influence of the Baptists. And so this charter was the governing document in Rhode Island until it became a state, and then it became the Constitution for 67 years. And then there's just a list of things that Clark did. He was very involved later on with political things and stuff like that as well. Any questions on any of that? Okay, all right.
You know, it's amazing hearing all of this. I didn't know any of this.
Yeah. I know. Well, so it's kind of like Sunday school sometimes. You get these embellished stories of biblical events, and when it comes to American history, you get a lot of these embellished stories of the Pilgrims and the Puritans and all these settlers, and it's tremendous what they did. But conveniently, Baptist history is largely eliminated. You reading a typical history book, you would almost think Baptists were non-existent in America until you get to the mid-1800s. Until you start to get to like Billy Graham or something like that. And he's just almost gone. And Baptists were so foundational in the influencing and founding of this country. There would not be a Bill of Rights if it was not for Baptists. And we'll get to that maybe next week or the following. But this country, the principles upon which this country was founded, came from the Baptists. In fact, I forget which Baptist pastor it was, but he was with Thomas Jefferson for a meal. Thomas Jefferson had come to the church service that Sunday, and they had a business meeting and everything like that. And after they got done with their business, as they were walking back to the Baptist pastor's house, he asked Mr. Jefferson, he says, "What did you think about our polity?" He said that he thought it was the best polity upon which a nation could be established. Huh. Interesting. All right.